It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to our second National Vehicle Residency Collective Summit 2024. It is June 22nd and June 22nd today. Tomorrow's the 23rd for our that we're going to be hosting this summit. We're very excited. There's been a tremendous amount of work to bring this all to you. And without any further ado, I think we will jump right into our summit. We can move to the next slide. I want to say good morning, everyone. It is, I think this is the end of the slide. Right. Thank you. One sec. Minor technical difficulties. Good morning, everyone. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the second National Vehicle Residency Summit. I am Dr. Graham Pruss, the director and co-founder of the National Vehicle Residency Collective, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you here with us today. Your presence speaks volumes about the importance and urgency of the work that we are doing together. First, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our generous sponsors, without whom this summit would not be possible. A heartfelt thankful to the National Homelessness Law Center, the Oak Foundation, and Vanderoo. Your support and commitment to our mission and for this summit have been invaluable. We are deeply grateful for your continued partnership. I would also like to thank our amazing team who developed and organized this summit, including the National Vehicle Residency Collective, or NVRC, project manager Marika MacArthur, our tech team Jake Hoster, Dave Nain, Dee Powers, and Ren Tai. I also want to thank all of the NVRC members who contributed their time and work over the past year, over which it would take me too long to name them all, who contributed to make this summit happen. This effort has truly been a labor of love and care. Over the past year, the National Vehicle Residency Collective has been hard at work, driven by our commitment to support and advocate for the vehicle residency community. We have conducted extensive research on the number of people living in vehicles across the country and have gathered contact information for parking programs that are now listed on our website at vehicleresidency.org. We are working with a nonprofit fiscal sponsor, NOPI, that empowers us to now accept donations and help sustain our programs. Our monthly collective and leadership meetings and newsletters now keep our members engaged and informed, fostering a strong, connected community. One of the most important lessons that we learned from our last summit and through outreach efforts over the past year is the need for a clear and inclusive vision of who we are and whom we serve. Our response to this is a big tent approach, which is the theme for this year's summit. NVRC, the National Vehicle Residency Collective, is a big tent, encompassing many diverse and unique camps of people and communities under a single banner of vehicle residency. No matter your background or your reasons for living in a vehicle, you are welcome here. Our strength lies in our diversity, allowing us to more effectively advocate and support our entire community. To begin our 2024 summit, I am excited to introduce New York Times journalist Rukmini Callimachi, whose investigative work has shed light on critical issues and inspired change. Rukmini will be moderating our plenary discussion panel shortly. Last year, Rukmini authored the widely read New York Times article, "I Live in My Car," about folks who sleep in vehicles and safe parking programs. Joining Rukmini are John Siebert, a former first responder from New York who has embraced the nomadic lifestyle, Emily Uyeda Kantrim, a founder of the Safe Parking Program of LA, the largest parking program in the United States, Tristia Bauman, NVRC co-founder and current directing attorney of housing at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, and Antonia Fasanelli, executive director of the National Homelessness Law Center. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists and Rukmini to our summit. I'm excited to learn more about what you learned in Rukmini in writing your article and to hear your conversation with our panel. Rukmini?
Thank you so much, Graham, and good morning, everybody. Last year, after I started covering housing, I technically cover real estate for the New York Times, which in the minds of my desk and most of my editors means the selling and buying of real estate. But I really wanted to focus on this crisis that I think we have across the country right now, which is a crisis of housing, of so many people that are unhoused. And I ended up focusing my first story on the story of Crystal Odette, She's a woman in her 30s who, at the time when I interviewed her, was making over $70,000 a year. She was working as a social worker for a department in Washington State. And yet, because of a combination of health bills, debt, etc., she ended up living in her car. And that was when I found her in a safe parking run by Karina O'Malley in Washington. I'm deeply grateful to her for how open she was with me and with my team. And with her collaboration, we were able to write her story and I hope, shed a little bit of light on what is happening around the country. I thought I would start with you, John. You are a person who is now living in his car. You're a former first responder, I understand. And from your bio, I believe that a health situation precipitated your current living situation. I was wondering if you could tell us about your path to vehicle residency, and also share with us, what you wish people understood about others who are living in cars. Oh, I think you're muted. I think you're muted. If you put, there you
Gotcha.
go.
Here we go.
Hey, John.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you guys. Thank you, NVRC, and very excited about this summit. I went back to Arizona in January of 2023. Okay, yes, 2023. My mother had passed from stage 4 cancer. Took care of her for quite a while. I just needed a fresh start. Went out to Arizona. I was working with Hilton for a while. Hilton Corporation had a job lined up. Went on out to Arizona. Took a 5-day trip to get out there, and interviewed for the job the next day, so I can transfer over my benefits, take care of any health issues. My back was already hurting pretty bad, and they gave the job away the day before. That was quite disappointing. So I had to use all my savings until the first paycheck from the next job. Ended up having to leave that in the end of June of 2024 with severe back pain and paralysis of my legs. Went to 7 different emergency rooms within a month. They couldn't figure out what it was. Thought it was ALS. Thought it was stage 4 cancer. Ended up being bone growth on my cervical spine, where they cut and fused 8 vertebrae, and I had to take a long, arduous path to learn how to walk again and move forward from there. Ended up staying in my car, went to BLM land in good old Quartzsite, Arizona, and met a lot of wonderful nomads, some in the same situation. These people are veterans that have served our country, teachers that served in the community, and just your everyday folk that you would not have any preconceived notions about them if you saw them at a Walmart or if you saw them at a car store or a supermarket. But a lot of them took on a lot of stigma once folks knew of their living situations. And a lot of people, it's a must do. You have no choice. You can't afford back home. It's $2,500 a month for a studio apartment. How am I going to do that waiting on Social Security? No job, things of that sort. And you have a lot of folks that have been down that path and are embracing that lifestyle, fixed incomes, Social Security. Perhaps they are in the same situation with a disability. It takes one paycheck away to be living the high life. Everything is good. You lose a job, you lose one paycheck, you're at square one. I've seen it during Hurricane Sandy. I helped with the advocacy and rebuilding in New York during that. We met a lot of folks that ended up living in their cars, and with the help of legislature, we were able to get them safe parking places. But those things are lacking throughout the country, and these folks are living in our communities. They are our family. They're your community. You need to embrace them. The folks that are doing the work, really helping their communities. They're working in the communities. They're making sure that things are safe. They're doing cleanups. The stigma just needs to stop about it and just learn who these folks are. Take 5 minutes and talk to them, and people will be amazed and hopefully be able to help them in the future.
Thank you, John. It definitely was my experience in speaking to people who were living out of vehicles, that many of them were working. You know, they had jobs. And in Crystal's case, she was using her car to commute to a park and ride, then taking the bus into the city of Seattle, going to her 9 to 5, and then taking the bus back, and then her car to the safe parking where she was, you know, spending the night. Nobody in her office knew until my article ran that she had been essentially homeless for 6, 7 months, you know, before my piece ran. And I think there is an enormous amount of stigma. And thank you for addressing that. Tristia, I thought I'd go to you next. You are a legal advocate that has worked tirelessly on this issue. I wondered if you could give us the lay of the land of the amount of criminalization that is happening in this space, the types of laws that are targeting people that live in cars or that are camping. And if you could also share with us strategies that can be used to advocate for people in this walk of life.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for inviting me to be here today. As the number of people living in vehicles has increased, so have laws that restrict where people living in vehicles can be. In fact, that's been the predominant policy response. The National Homelessness Law Center tracked this category of laws from 2006 through at least 2019 and found that it was the fastest growing anti-homeless policy, if you can call vehicle residence homelessness. I know that there's many ways to think about that. The type of policies that you see across the country really can vary. And so when I call it a category growth, it really encompasses a wide variety of local policies. That can be parking regulations. That's really common, especially for people living in large vehicles like RVs. The parking regulations can say you're not allowed to park in this area of town, or you're not allowed to park anywhere in town from this hour to that hour. It's functionally impossible to comply with those parking laws. So that is a restriction on living in vehicles for all practical purposes. There also is a massive growth in laws that treat even sheltering in your vehicle or using it as a form of shelter as a crime. And it can be enforced as a crime, including with arrest. An example of that is the city of San Diego has enforced what is called its vehicle habitation ordinance. It's unlawful to use a vehicle for human habitation, which can include merely, being inside of your vehicle, if that's your form of shelter. And it's treated as a criminal act and enforced as such. And unfortunately, that's very common. There are a lot of strategies that can be used to combat both those laws themselves on their face or as applied to people who are living in vehicles, but also the downstream consequences of enforcement. For example, people aren't able to register their vehicles when they receive parking tickets for not being able to comply with a parking ordinance that is targeting their type of shelter. That can lead to tows and impoundments. So the types of strategies I think really need to be tailored to the needs of the individual. And it includes legal advocacy. So of course, lawyers can come in and file lawsuits to challenge these ordinances. They're often local ordinances by filing lawsuits in federal and state courts. But that's not the only way that these types of laws can be challenged through advocacy. When a vehicle is towed and impounded, there's often an administrative process where you can challenge the storage, which can be the difference between getting your vehicle back or not. It can be the difference between the amount of money being something that you could never possibly afford to pay and being burdened with financial debt, or having a reasonable amount that you're able to pay over time in order to obtain not just your vehicle and shelter, but all the property it contains. with it. And there are also other organizing and advocacy strategies where we can go to our local governments that are enforcing these laws and let them know that we will be watching when they attempt to enforce these laws through organizing, through Street Watch, and through local policy advocacy. We also can make a real difference for vehicle residents.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tristia. Emily, you run or help run one of the largest safe parking programs in the country in Los Angeles. I had to learn this term when I was doing my story last year. So safe parking is essentially a parking lot that has been set aside for vehicle residents, usually people living in small cars, and in some places also for people living in RVs. Can you talk about the impact of this work? I thought I would share just one small anecdote, which is when I was reporting my story, I ended up speaking to the president of a community college in California. He had been the vice president of the college during the COVID era when he noticed that large numbers of students were living out of their cars. These are college students that are actually living in their cars. And when he became president, he ended up setting aside an entire parking structure at this community college for their unhoused students to live in. And he described to me the kind of pushback that he got from the board of trustees and others. And the pushback was that it felt like a kind of giving up, that they were essentially institutionalizing a form of lesser housing, for their students, and that what they should be doing is creating another dorm or creating something else. And his take on that was, okay, yes, this is maybe not the best thing, but creating another dorm, that's years down the road. And I'm thinking of the students of ours, the freshman honor student who is sleeping in a Toyota Tercel in an unsafe area of the city, who might get mugged, who might whatever, and I want to address that. And he was able to get over this hurdle, and they've set aside an entire parking structure for their students. I wondered if you get the same pushback in your work, Emily, and what you have learned about this, and what communities can do to support people that are living in vehicles.
Yeah, thanks so much for this question, and I appreciate being in community with you all this morning. I think you perfectly described why we actually need safe parking programs. It is not to replace other types of dwelling. It's to acknowledge that we have some pretty pronounced systemic issues that result in people being displaced. And one of the ways to cope with that is, if you have a vehicle, you're likely to sleep in it rather than leaving the vehicle and sleeping outside, right? It's just it's just reality. So one of the things that we really thought about in starting Safe Parking LA was certainly not to think that we're inventing something new. But how can we allow other folks to see how natural this progression would be if we don't have better interventions, and how living in a vehicle is a really great intervention to be able to help stabilize so that people do not lose what they have left. There is a huge investment that people, lots of folks, all your community members, including people who are living in their vehicles, people are ready to make investments in how to move forward. And that will be really hard to do without some baseline stabilization. So the perfect example is a community college or someplace that already has its own campus. It has its own access to restrooms. It has its own, it's already connected with the folks who might use this service. And so it's really quite easy for any educational institution, for sure, and then cities as well, to find ways to use resources they already have, to understand that they're already invested in the future of the folks that they're serving, and to kind of put the pieces together to make sure that we're not leaving anything on the table when we're addressing the needs of a vulnerable population. And I think sort of the added layer there is John's story, like so many others, is that we're all members of the vulnerable population in some way. And that's our avenue and our access to understanding how we can participate. And so I really appreciate the folks being here today to talk more about that. The sort of capping off at Safe Parking LA, when we started in 2017, we were not the first folks to do this. We're not the first folks to do this in LA, but one of the things that we tried really hard to do is to open up our co-creation of the programming with our clients, allowing them to write and help us put forward guidelines that we would like to take to the city and the funders, that those became the best practices used across the Los Angeles continuum of care. When we started, there was one safe parking program. There are now 23 across 4,000 square miles of Los Angeles County. It's certainly not enough numbers wise, but it is also a little bit of a testament to, if you can pull back the layers a little bit, if you can talk about people's concerns, risk mitigation, insurance, all the things that people are most concerned about when they say, yes, I want to help my neighbor, but there's all these concerns. If you can just really lay that out, you can share it with folks, you can really see impact start to meet the need that we see so pressing in our communities.
Thank you, Emily. In my own research, I noticed that there was a difference, or I thought a big difference, between safe parkings where the person is allowed to park overnight, but then has to leave early in the morning. And then others, like the one I visited, run by Karina O'Malley in the Seattle area in Washington, where the parkers are allowed, to stay continuously. Can you talk about that difference? And, obviously it's, I'm just trying to imagine as a person who is housed, if I had to leave my house every morning, I mean, I do on the weekday to go to work, but that is in the end, a choice. It seems to me that it creates a lot of stress on the person if they're forced to leave, every morning for the waking hours, and how you, as an advocate, is looking into that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways to build a safe parking program, and I know Graham's going to address some of that in the summit over the course of the different sessions. I think the way that Safe Parking LA has looked at it in our early years is to really think, how do we make the best use of resources we already have? What's the lowest sort of barrier to entry for the whole community to participate in some of these programs? And some of them mean, well, Los Angeles is very famous for having lots of parking that nothing goes on in the evening. So how can we just immediately use those? And then how do we move towards what do our clients need? How do we allow for our vehicle dwellers to inform what actually will serve them best? And so there are 24-hour safe parking programs. There are different ways to address different kinds of vehicular need. There are ways to address sanitation differently in different spaces. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. A lot of it has to do with what's sort of the location, what's the weather, how do we understand where we are. I mean, Los Angeles, the city and the county are really vast geographic landscapes. And so there's a completely different need on one side of the city or the county to the other. There's different weather patterns, there's different access and different transportation. And so there are some safe parking programs that people will just use their vehicle almost like you mentioned in your story, almost as their tiny home shelter, where they take public transportation and actually leave their vehicle as if it were their dwelling and go about their day and then come back to it at night. And there are some that they'll actually drive their vehicle out every single day. And we need all the different types because we have lots of different types of folks and lots of different types of needs and lots of different types of geographies.
Thank you, Emily. Antonia, you're with the National Homelessness Law Center, and I wondered if you could give us some insight into what is happening at the Supreme Court right now with the Grants Pass case. I understand that one of the plaintiffs there is a person who was living in an RV. And so this issue that has been, that we are all aware of is now getting a national spotlight with this case before the highest court in the land. And I understand you have some slides to share with us.
Absolutely. And I'll just begin by saying thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here, and it really is an honor of the law centers to be able to support the incredible work of this wonderful community here. So I'm really delighted to be here. And I will be sharing a little bit about the case of Gloria Johnson versus the city of Grants Pass. So bear with me as I load the slides here. Great. The case of Gloria Johnson versus City of Grants Pass is a case that has been moving its way through the courts since 2018 and was taken up by the Supreme Court in January of this year. It is a case that was heard in April, and we are anticipating a decision next week on this case. So I'll be sharing a little bit about the background of the case and things we can do once the decision comes out, and talking about how it impacts vehicle residents. First of all, just a little bit about the Law Center. The Law Center envisions a society where every person can live with dignity and enjoy their basic human rights, including the right to affordable, quality, and safe housing. And in order to achieve this goal, we fearlessly advance federal, state, and local policies to prevent and end homelessness, and we fiercely defend the rights of all unhoused persons. Picking up on what Tristia shared earlier, there certainly have been dramatic increases in laws criminalizing homelessness. This is a cover on the right of a report that Tristia actually worked on, that the Law Center released in 2019. And at that point, there was that 60% of surveyed cities had one or more laws restricting living in vehicles. And Grants Pass certainly is one of those cities. I want to just take a note that in this study, it's looking at city laws and how they punish persons for either living in vehicles or living outdoors in tents or with blankets and pillows. But increasingly over the last few years, there has been a well-funded and coordinated campaign to actually enact state-level laws to punish unhoused persons. This is a map of efforts to enact these laws in the 2024 legislative session. As I mentioned before, this has been going on for several years. The entity that has been funding this oppressive legislative effort is called the Cicero Institute. And as you can see from the map, they are primarily targeting states with conservative legislatures. So they're leaning into states that are that have legislators who are more willing to consider legislation to expand punishment for people who are unhoused. I will say about this that even though there is a well-funded and coordinated campaign, there is also a very strong local grassroots effort amongst many of the organizations across these states to oppose these bills. In the last year, we were able to oppose bills in 60% of the states. Last year, we were able to successfully oppose bills in 70% of the states. So even though there is a well-funded campaign to push these laws, the incredible work of local advocates and organizations across the country has actually successfully helped to beat back these bills across the country. And some of you may have been involved in those efforts. So a little bit about Grants Pass and how this impacts vehicle residents. So first of all, just to set the stage, this is a picture of the US Supreme Court here. The case is really about whether cities can punish people who are unhoused. So either people who are living outdoors with blankets and pillows, with or without tents, or people who are living in vehicles, even if the town does not provide any shelter. So a little bit about Grants Pass itself. Grants Pass is truly a small town. It's a town of just under 40,000 people. And it is, like many cities across the country, thousands and thousands of units short of the affordable housing that it needs. The reason that there is an affordable housing crisis in Grants Pass is starting at about 2010, 2011, there was a major influx of primarily wealthy persons from California into Grants Pass to buy up housing more cheaply than was available in California. Grants Pass in 2010 was a population of about 20,000 people. So that influx actually doubled the population of Grants Pass. And it drove up the price of rental housing to an unaffordable level for the longtime residents of Grants Pass. And so over time, more and more longtime residents of Grants Pass could not afford rental housing and were evicted for not being able to pay the rent. Grants Pass also has the dubious distinction of being a community where there is no public shelter. Some of you who may have read articles about the case know that there is something called the Gospel Rescue Mission. It's not a public shelter by any stretch. It is a mandatory work program, work without pay program, and it does not allow persons to come in with animals, emotional support animals, or other kinds of assistance. So it is really not an accessible shelter to persons with disabilities at all. And so longtime residents of Grants Pass have had no choice but to sleep outside, or if they happen to have a vehicle, to sleep in their vehicle. The town of Grants Pass, seeing its longtime residents sleeping more and more outdoors, instead of saying, we would like to help our fellow residents, we'd like to expand shelter or even expand housing, instead enacted laws that would enable the town to punish residents of Grants Pass in an effort to make the town so inhospitable that they would actually move out of the town. We know that this was their intention because it's actually in the public record of the town council meetings. And so this is a quote here from one of the elected leaders saying that the point of the law was to make it uncomfortable enough for people in the city, houseless individuals in the city, would want to move down the road. That was actually their intention. So the case was filed by some incredible lawyers at the Oregon Law Center and the Oregon Justice Center as well. And to defend the rights of the entire class of unhoused persons in Grants Pass, vehicle residents and persons who are living outdoors who do not have vehicles. The three folks who were leading that class are Gloria Johnson, John Logan, and the late Deborah Blake. Both Gloria Johnson and John Logan live in vehicles. Gloria Johnson lives in RV, and John Logan lives in his truck. So the goals initially were to fiercely defend their rights under the US Constitution. And as the case was picked up by the Supreme Court, to ultimately use the Supreme Court's decision to take the case to build power and momentum towards housing for all persons. I want to share a little bit about how the arguments went when they were heard by the Supreme Court on April 22nd. Some of you may be familiar with Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She understood the issue really from the beginning, and she asked the lawyer for Grants Pass. She said, you don't arrest babies who have blankets over them. You don't arrest people who are sleeping on the beach, as I tend to do, she said, if I've been there a while. You only arrest people who don't have a second home. Isn't that correct? She's pretty marvelous. But even Brett Kavanaugh, who's not an obvious supporter of these issues, also said, when people in Grants Pass get out of jail, if that's where you end up, what's going to happen then? They're still not going to have a bed available because there's no shelter. How does this law help? So even Brett Kavanaugh seemed to understand the issue. So a little bit about what happened around the Supreme Court case. This is a picture of Congressman Maxwell Frost from Florida speaking about his own experience with houselessness and his support for Gloria Johnson and the other Grants Pass residents. This is a few days before the Supreme Court case, and standing behind him are Representative Cori Bush and a number of other members of Congress who actually filed a brief in support of the Grants Pass unhoused residents. There was an effort to, this is a picture of many of my colleagues, including my colleagues Eric Tars and Jesse Rabinowitz from the Law Center. There was an effort to meet with members of Congress leading up to the case in order to get their support to file a brief. On the day of the argument, there was a lie-in front of the Supreme Court. This is a picture of many of the folks who came from around the country to the rally in front of the Supreme Court. We knew that Gloria Johnson and John Logan and many of the residents of Grants Pass could not be there on the day that their case was heard. So many other residents came in solidarity to let them know that they are not alone. And there were over 30 coordinated actions nationwide in solidarity with the residents of Grants Pass. This is a picture of a rally in Sacramento, organized by the Sacramento Homeless Organizing Committee. Many of these coordinated actions were organized by the Western Regional Advocacy Project, which did an incredible job supporting rallies across the country. And so what has happened since April 22nd to now is we are waiting for the decision. So what's next? We expect the Supreme Court, SCOTUS is the Supreme Court, to rule by June 28th. This is the Supreme Court's own rule to try to issue all decisions by June 30th. And so the next decision day is Wednesday of next week. And we are eagerly anticipating that decision. In addition to waiting for that decision, we are taking several steps. The first is we have prepared what we call defensive legislation, state and federal legislation, in case the court rules the wrong way. This is legislation that would adopt the protections that existed in Gloria Johnson's case if the court rules against her, originally existed. There's also offensive efforts. This includes launching a bold national housing advocacy platform. This is a coordinated effort with other national organizations to create a unified message to support extensive funding of housing to ensure that there is a home for every person in the United States. This is essentially a new deal for housing. And lastly, in collaboration with the Western Regional Advocacy Project, also known as WRAP, the National Homelessness Law Center, will be rolling out legal defense clinics in collaboration with organizing groups across the country to provide legal defense to unhoused persons who are arrested or cited for simply being unhoused, and to work with community organizers to repeal laws punishing their mere existence. So on the decision day, which could be Wednesday or Thursday or Friday of next week, I urge everyone to go to our website on the Supreme Court case, johnsonvgrantspass.com. And here is the actual link to our social media toolkit. If you are a social media user, there's lots of materials in the social media toolkit to put out about the decision. And you can follow our socials at the National Homelessness Law Center, at homeless_law, and at H&H Campaign on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other sources. So thank you so much. This is my information and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Antonia. And thank you, John and Emily, Tristia, and Graham. This is our panel, and I think we're going to say goodbye to you now as we move on to the next session.